time to say a very good morning to Peter Hitchens of the Mail on Sunday. Peter, hello, how are you? Are you there, Peter?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, welcome. Sorry, I thought we missed you there for a second.
No, there was the usual technical glitch at the most important moment, but I can hear you and hear me.
Well, listen, if it happens to the Prime Minister, it can happen to you. I mean, you know, you would like to
Exactly.
think that in Downing Street they might have slightly better communications facilities than most of the rest of us, but sadly it's not true.
Well, I hope they've got better communications facilities than I've got.
Now, listen, again, at the weekend, you were urging people to write to their MPs. Many people are doing it. There is a vote tomorrow. I'm not sure if you know the answer to this question, but I'm told that if this bill is in fact voted down, that somehow we will revert back either to the rules before this latest lockdown, or we'll just revert back to this lockdown.
I don't know. I'd be very surprised if it's voted down, because I think Keir Starmer, the well-known Trotskyist, will get his troops to vote for this and to back the government, because he's not in the mood for opposing any of this at the moment. So I don't think that's the danger. What I think is most important, and the reason why I'm saying to people, please write to your member of parliament with this simple message: if you vote today, Tuesday, to destroy the jobs of others, don't expect to keep your own. No. You can do this fantastically easily, by the way, by simply going to a thing called writetothem.com. Extraordinarily easy to find. Will then direct you to your member of parliament. You won't have to look up their email address or anything. It's so easy to do, and if enough people do it, then MPs who mostly can't think but who can all count will begin to worry about their majorities. So if we can start to drive a wedge between the Tory party and the Johnson junta, then we can actually begin to bring an end to this thing, because nothing else will. So, yeah, I'm very much urging people to do that now. There's still time to do it. The vote's tomorrow. The more people do it, tell your friends, tell your neighbours, ask your colleagues, ask your family, get everybody you can to get involved in this, because actually it's the only lawful, peaceful power which we have in this country. And if we don't use it, then we shouldn't be surprised if, when this goes wrong, other people use other methods which will be much less pleasant.
Well, indeed. And as we saw at the weekend, and, you know, I always speak about these things with a certain caveat, because I wasn't there. I don't see precisely what happens before a particular video is shot. But it certainly seems to me that there were enough instances of overreach by the police. There was the case in Bournemouth of some people who seemed to have been trapped on a bus for a ridiculous amount of time while they were being prevented from demonstrating. There were people, individuals who seemed to have been arrested by a grossly overwhelming number of police officers, while seemingly doing nothing other than just saying something which the police didn't like. You know, and it worries me intensely that this is going on in 2020 in my capital city.
Well, it is extremely worrying and distressing to watch. I myself don't have much time for demonstrations. I did all the demonstrating.
No, I'm with you. I'm not a fan of them either.
In my Trotskyist period, but I still think that the freedom to demonstrate is a very important one, and I think that it has effectively been abolished by the government's, in my view, abuse of the law. And here's another thing. This has been challenged in the courts by Simon Dolan at great expense and great trouble, and we're still waiting. Well, it came before the Lord Chief Justice, I think, 3 weeks ago now. We're still waiting for any word from them on whether all this is even legal. But what is certainly true is that police who seem to decide to be zealous about some things, but are unable to be zealous about others. For instance, they won't pursue burglaries or car thefts or shoplifters. Right. But my goodness, give them the power to handcuff demonstrators and drag them off into holding pens and fine them vast sums of money, and they use it. And also, look at the numbers of them. For years and years, I've been told, it's the reason why the police can't patrol the streets is there aren't enough of them. They've got terrible shortages. Look at the place. As soon as a demonstration turns out they don't like, thousands of them appear from wherever they keep them, masked and accoutered for battle, and they start dragging people off the streets. In many cases, as far as one can see, people who weren't doing anything other than protesting.
Well, right.
And it is a complete change in the nature of our country when the freedom to protest is effectively taken away like this, and there's no restraints on it. What is the government doing to actually say to the police, this wasn't what we meant you to do? Right. We didn't want to make demonstrating illegal. Or maybe it is the case the government does want to make demonstrations illegal, in which case they're going about it in a very effective way.
Well, indeed. And I mean, one of the things that I found even more ridiculous, I don't know if you saw this one, was up in Newcastle, I think it was, police officers knocking on the door of a student residence and demanding to be allowed in to see how many people were inside. And the guy out was saying, what right do you have to do it? They started quoting some law at him that the government had passed. I don't know what the end result was, but he was basically not going to let them in. He said, I'll bring people to the front door and let you see who's here if you wish, but you cannot come into the house and you cannot go into individual rooms and go through people's private property. The police seem to think they can.
Well, of course, if they think they can and they turn out mob-handed enough, most people will give in to them.
Yeah.
And we have actually sacrificed a lot of the security of our homes over recent years. You see constantly portrayed on television with the implication this is a good thing, the police smashing down people's front doors. Usually supposedly in pursuit of the drug dealers that nothing much ever seems to happen to.
Right.
And people have learned to applaud this. And I've always felt, even though I'm no keener on drug dealers than anybody else, that there was something rather fishy about it, that the sanctity of the home, the idea that the Englishman's home was his castle, was a very important part of liberty in this country, and it's now gone. I don't know whether they have that freedom or not. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the laws, so-called laws, because the legality is dubious, which the government had put together on the basis of the 1984 Public Health Act, did allow them to actually burst into people's homes. In any case, if you get in their way, they will undoubtedly get that power from some compliant magistrate. I think we have given away by passivity, failure to protest, an awful lot of liberty which we possessed 50 years ago. And I think this is a very strong warning we're getting now. If we don't fight to get it back, then we may have lost it forever. But we do increasingly seem to live in a sort of militia state, where the police are a government militia rather than a police force. Yeah,
it does seem that way, because they do appear to be far more kind of galvanised by attacking people that they think they can attack, rather than actually preventing or solving crime. You know, the crime statistics get worse every year. The solving of those crime statistics get worse every year, you know, but they seem to have a real kind of fondness for running across parks in order to surround one man who happens to be saying COVID's a con.
Well, in almost any task, people will do the thing which is easy and attractive, rather than the thing which is difficult and important. In our trade, for instance, who wants to be the reporter who has to go and stand on the doorstep in the pouring rain in the middle of the night? Who wants to be the person who's outside the negotiations at 3 a.m? Everybody wants to be sitting at a nice warm desk writing opinion pieces. Right. And that's what they'll do, unless there's somebody in charge who goes, no, actually you need to get out. And what's happened in the police is a huge failure of management and direction. Yeah. Instead of being sent out onto the streets to prevent crime, their job, they've been indulged and allowed to do what they want to do. And what they want to do, apart from suing each other for sexual harassment, is to do bureaucratic things, or to go out and, as I say, be how shall I put it, overbearing to powerless people. Yes. And if you put powerful people in a position where they can push powerless people about, that is what I'm afraid they'll do. It's human nature. It's also been, and I explore this in a book I wrote in 2004, The Abolition of Liberty. It's a very curious thing that a country in which crime is no longer properly pursued or prosecuted very quickly becomes a country in which the individual's liberty is circumscribed, because ultimately the legal system has to assume everybody's guilty and treat everybody as a suspect and everybody as an enemy. And you see that demonstrated here now. The police regard the public largely as a nuisance, rather than as friends and allies. Yes, and just in case the police haven't got time to police everything in our world, you'll know, because we had a Twitter exchange about this, that our last interview last Monday, when I posted it on Facebook, it put this warning on it: missing context, independent fact checkers say that this information could mislead people. Now, first of all, I'm rather peeved at the idea that some spotty youths have somehow been, checking up on what you and I have been talking about and deciding unilaterally that somehow it might be misleading to people, without actually saying why. Well, you can. I had the same notice placed on. I put my weekly column on Facebook, and I had the same notice placed on that when I said last week that the mask study, the Danish mask study, showed that masks were ineffective in controlling the spread of COVID, which it did. They effectively made no difference, and this notice was applied. If you click on it, they do come up with a sort of explanation. But the fact is, it's none of their business. Right. It's not the business of Facebook to tell other people whether they think that what I say is right or not. People can find that out for themselves.
Yeah.
But the problem is, again, these enormously powerful corporations are now taking upon themselves the power and they regard the duty to actually guide people in what to think and tell them what they can safely read and what not. Now, as you know, I'm no lover of Donald Trump.
No.
But notice when he started putting out these tweets saying that the election had been rigged, Twitter started saying this is baseless. And then you've got the BBC beginning to say every time that Trump came on the radio or the television, every time that he made this claim, the BBC said it was baseless. Well, if the BBC said every time anyone made a baseless claim on the BBC that it was baseless, they wouldn't have time to do anything else, because people are saying baseless things all the time.
Well, quite. But also,
the current government, for instance, most of what they say is baseless.
Well, that which brings me to my next point of attack, if you like. There's an MP for Harborough called Neil O'Brien, who seems to have taken it upon himself to be the sole kind of crusader against any newspaper which is critical of the government's policies and or the government's use of statistics. He attacked the Daily Mail last weekend solely because they had some graph that he thought was wrong. He is now this week attacking the Sunday Telegraph as if he has been appointed as this kind of, Tory with the story, as if he's the only one that actually knows. I wish he would be as rigorous with some of the government stats as he is with attacking newspaper ones.
Well, of course, and I get this thing all the time. Well, that Peter Hitchens, the well-known virologist, Peter Hitchens, the well-known epidemiologist, sarcastically saying that I have no business to comment on this. Well, of course, I don't claim to be a virologist or an epidemiologist, but I do look very carefully at what such people say. And when I refer to the matter, I'm usually quoting the expertise of others. But the interesting thing is this: Johnson and Hancock and Jenrick are not, as far as I know, experts in virology or epidemiology. But no one ever questions their right, not only to talk about it, but to make legislation and rules about it, which have crippled the entire country. All I'm doing is criticizing. But again and again, in our current culture, those who are criticized are held to those who criticize are held to completely different standards than the government is held to. And this is the wrong way around. In any kind of state where the opposition and where criticism is the main object of attack, is a state in which freedom is in danger. Dissent should not be singled out for criticism which government doesn't have to undergo. But I do get this all the time, and you never see, or I have never seen, any of these Facebook interventions on anything that Johnson or Hancock has said, saying this can't be trusted, or this is wrong, or this is factually incorrect. But the fundamental claim the government make all the time, and the BBC ceaselessly accepts as true, the claim that these shutdowns and cripplings and stranglings of the economy in our society are effective is accepted as truth without any examination at all. And I drew attention in my column on Sundays to the fact that the most recent piece of research showing there is no known connection between these lockdowns and a reduction in deaths. There never has been. No. The claim that they are effective is unproven. Yet it's constantly accepted. And when is Facebook ever going to come up with a little label on the claims that just saying actually this claim is baseless? When is Twitter going to do so? Not at all, because they are not impartial in this application, and it is quite evident that they're not. And it's a menace to liberty that they behave in this way.
And there's a kind of a cynical side to it as well, in a way, treating the public really rather ridiculously as if they're stupid children. Like today, for example, we've got the news coming out, which the BBC, as you say, is reporting as if it's absolute fact, that Imperial College has now decided that the infection rate is going down. And with the clear inference that the reason that it's going down is because we had a 4-week lockdown, which, to be honest, wasn't any different from what happened before the 4-week lockdown. They're now saying that the R rate is falling down below 1. They're now saying that, therefore we can conclude that what we did was right. Well, I'm sorry, I don't think you can conclude that, can you?
Well, no, you can't. And in fact, they, as far as I can tell, they were quite careful not actually specifically to say that it was caused by it, but they left the implication very strongly there. We still need to go back, of course, to the most significant change in all the figures that took place back in April the 8th, when the number of deaths from the actual wave of COVID, I believe that the so-called second wave is largely a statistically manufactured thing, but the actual outbreak in March and April, when deaths peaked on April the 8th, that could not have been caused It simply could not have been caused by the shutdown announced and begun on March the 23rd.
No.
There wasn't time enough for it to be the cause. And this is now quite evident, but it's still not examined. People don't turn back and say, did this work? Because everybody involved in both government and the government broadcasting service, formerly known as the BBC, everybody involved in promoting this thing sticks constantly to the presumption that what they have done is right and can't be examined. The only criticism they will ever allow or make or repeat is the suggestion that we didn't lock down soon enough. A piece of completely specious rubbish, but that's the only thing they will allow as criticism, and that is what I fear. Unless those of us who are against this keep up our attack endlessly, that is what the public inquiry, which will be held into this, will conclude. And once that happens, then we're doomed to have these things over and over again until the end of time.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the counter-argument, I suppose, to all of what we say is that there aren't very many countries in Europe doing it any differently. And in fact, I had a message from somebody who's living in France at the moment who says that in France, if you want to go out, you basically have to get a letter of permission from the local gendarmerie. So, I mean, it's not just in Britain where this kind of craziness is going on.
No, it isn't. But those of us who are against it, do keep pointing to the example of Sweden, which is ceaselessly misrepresented by partial and inadequate reports of what's going on there. Because there seem to be so many people, as it were, locked in cages who look at the freedom of Sweden and resent their freedom and want to chain them up too. Also, I think there's word coming out of Switzerland on the lockdown skeptics site today. Switzerland, which is steered a sort of middle path, again showing that more evidence that shutting down the country is not effective in keeping the disease at bay at all. But the fact that lots of other people have made the same mistake doesn't mean that it isn't a mistake. And countries such as France, I'm sorry about this, but I love France, and it's a country I visit with much pleasure and have a lot of admiration for. But it is actually still really a 17th century autocracy. And its government reaches for the heavy club of power and restraint very much more readily than a British government either has done in the past or should do. And the same is true of almost all the other continental countries. They have been used to a long time to very, very powerful state authority. And when they get the opportunity to use it, that's what they do. We should be different. We shouldn't be comparing ourselves with countries which are less free than us.
No, that's true. But also, I always imagine, and maybe you know France better than I do. I mean, I've only ever been there as a tourist, really. It seems to be a country where the people rise up much quicker than the people in this country rise up if they don't like something the government's doing. And yet they don't. I mean, there have been riots going on in Paris, but, you know, they happen so often that you kind of are not necessarily that surprised. But in the bulk of the country, they seem to be accepting it.
Well, I think possibly if you got out of Paris, I hear reports from outside Paris where in some small towns the regime is more relaxed. But the truth is that it has this history of what's sometimes called negotiation by riot, rather than the democratic and lawful institutions of the country performing their job as a safety valve and a means by which people can protest lawfully. They don't really work very much, and then there is an explosion of violence on the streets, particularly in Paris. Government then changes. But that's a terrible way of ruling things. Our system, where the government listens to the people before they take to the streets and start hurling cobblestones, is a better one. The problem is we seem to have adopted the French system. And ultimately, if you adopt the French system, then I think you probably end up with negotiation by riot and cobblestones hurtling through the streets, which I very much do not wish to see. I fear it greatly.
Yes.
No,
I agree. I see no.
Write to your MP.
Yeah. No, I see no end to it. I see if this continues in terms of the government's policies, there will be these marches incessantly from now until kingdom come, as far as I can see. Not sure if we lost you there.
Well, I'm afraid you did, but I think I got the point. I mean, there will be marches, and I think that people will get less well behaved, and the police will get less well behaved, and the general feeling of lawfulness and peace in the country could well be undermined. And I think the government should be very alarmed by the fact that it's sealed off all the safety valves. Yeah. Because when the safety valves are sealed, then the boiler bursts, and how it bursts and when it bursts, I wouldn't like to predict, but I have to say long winter months of continued shutdown with more and more people realizing that their jobs are never going to come back and their businesses are finished. It doesn't seem to me to be a recipe for social peace.
No, I don't think it does. Peter, once again, we're out of time, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. Great to talk to you once more. Same time next week. I fear much will have changed by then.